Welcome everybody. Let's start our third webinar. My name is Paweł Mączka, and we have Satya Sankaran. Satya, would you like to pronounce your surname and try to pronounce my surname? I know it should be your joke, but I stole it.
We'd be here all day. Hey everyone, I'm Satya Sankaran. Again, if you're exposed to Indian names, that's like an executive summary of my real name. And I always joke that we had some of the toughest names to pronounce because we just loaded with so many vowels. Until I met all my friends from Poland, they certainly have no shortage of consonants. C, Z, K together in one word. I still have no idea how to pronounce them. I'm working on it.
My surname is not the worst because it's Mączka. But let's imagine that you have a Brzęczyszczykiewicz, for example, or
that one.
Książkiewicz. So then we'll kill all of the competition with our surnames. So hello everybody. So we got some, of course, people from the user group. I see some faces outside. So I'm glad to and appreciate your time hosting. And of course, Satya, I would like to thank you to prepare this presentation, to prepare this topic with me, and your willingness to share the knowledge with the community. Because we're recording, no worries, most of our webinars are between 20 and 30 people, but the most important part, we will put this on the YouTube, and then we see the huge amount of the viewers and comments. So feel free to and enjoy your webinar. I'm giving you the voice, of course. Like always, I will try to interrupt from time to time.
So sounds good. Thanks, Paweł. Again, if there are any questions, feel free to use the chat and ask questions, and we'll be happy to take them along the way. So the way I structured the presentation is, obviously the goal here is to talk about best practices for protecting database environments and what kind of considerations exist, and also what to look out for when you're actually selecting a backup application to work with for different types of data sets, and what matters and what doesn't is really what we're going to spend a lot of time on. Before we do that, I do want a quick introduction of Spectrum Protect Plus. I know this webinar is primarily targeted at the Spectrum Protect users group in LinkedIn, which Paweł has done a great job of mobilizing over 1,000 users in a very small time frame. So Paweł, great job. And thanks for getting this webinar series going. With that said, I'm going to spend maybe the first 10 minutes or so on just Spectrum Protect Plus and give an introduction of what we're working on. But I promise that I'll keep it fairly generic once we get through those slides. In fact, I will add a disclaimer that Paweł is a good friend, which means he's probably going to get me to say something stupid. So I do want to state that everything I say and do and show in this webinar is purely mine and not something that reflects any of the organizations I represent. And this is a disclaimer that I had to add specifically because Paweł is the host.
No worries, Satya. I will get you out if you're saying something stupid. Even if it will be the next slide, I will do it.
Okay, sounds good. Perfect. Thanks, Paweł. So just want a quick introduction to the Spectrum Protect Plus product line itself. What is it meant to be? It's essentially a product that is bringing together the benefits of software-defined approach to copy data management and data protection, and kind of marry that with an answer for all types of workloads, whether it means you want to drive hardware snapshots with it in future, or whether you want to offload data sets to cloud. It's trying to build a platform for everything in one place. So data protection and copy data management in one combined platform is really the essence of Spectrum Protect Plus. The goal is to solve multiple different pain points, whether it's to do with test and dev, whether it's to do with insurance policies where you want your data set back in no time, whether it's to do facilitate forensics and analytics. We want to allow you to do all of those pain points in one platform and do it multiple different ways. I mean, how many customers today actually have an admin allocated to backups? A lot of people are moving to a self-service model, and we see down the trend more. It's not that people are running systems, it's actually going to be systems running systems, which means you need very tight coupling of the various API sets that these products and platforms need to enable. So that's really, if you want to explain what is Protect Plus, why does it exist, and how we do it that's different, this is the one slide I would use to explain. And there are a few key tenets of Spectrum Protect Plus that I want to highlight as well. Everything is policy-based, and everything that you send and backup is instantly mountable. Whether it's your SQL dataset, whether it's your Oracle dataset, whether it's your VMware dataset, whether it's your Hyper-V dataset, or DB2 dataset in the near future, anything that you send to Spectrum Protect Plus as a backup is instantly mountable and instantly accessible. So you could send a 2 terabyte instance or a 20 gigabyte instance. The restore time is essentially the same. Within the first minute, you should be able to bring up the data set and start using it. And that's a key tenet of Spectrum Protect Plus that we keep as we add support for more and more workloads in the last year and working towards in the next year as well. Everything is enabled for self-service. We talked about it. So whether you're a DBA that want access to only your SQL dataset, but you want to prevent your Oracle DBS from accessing SQL dataset, certainly that's something that the product enables you to do. Do you want your VM admins to stay out of your Oracle environments? Yes, that would be something that you could do as well within the product. And it bridges the old with the new. We have a lot of over tens of thousands of customers running Spectrum Protect. And this is essentially an extension and a modernization of Spectrum Protect by kind of focusing on emerging workloads that are better suited for the orchestration and the API level self-service capabilities needed today in the market. You will also see that it uses primarily APIs and not agents, and we'll actually talk about it in the best practices section a bit more. And everything we do is also searchable and cataloged and searchable for you to access as well. Okay, so there's one thing that I do want to highlight as a difference, and we would talk about this at great detail when we go into the details of various best practices. There are essentially a couple of different types of emerging data protection options out there. And there is a place for both of them. And actually Protect Plus is trying to bring both of them together into a single platform. One is a purpose-built backup appliance. You buy a bunch of hardware and you say, give me a copy of every one of your data set, and I will allow you to provision those copies out to you. The big concern, I mean, the good thing about it is that is a model that works for primarily anything that you run on your system, with or without regards to what kind of system are they running in place. And one of the things that IBM introduced with Spectrum Copy Data Management product, which is something we're working to include in more and more of our flash systems today, is actually the ability to deliver the same thing on the flash systems itself. So you don't have to create a backup golden copy sitting on a backup appliance. You could actually work with the production copy that you have on flash systems. And because it can deliver great IOPS, there's no reason to kind of move it to a different location. Just know that there is a place in the market for both types of data sets. In fact, in the same customer environment, I see many customers resort to using one or the other for different data sets, depending on different requirements. And that's one of the considerations we'll talk about today as we go into specific database best practices. So this is my one of last two slides before I actually go into a very generic section. So what does Spectrum Protect Plus do? We essentially rely on all published APIs from the hypervisors, from the database vendors. And without any agents, we interact with them. We add intelligence to that layer and ensure that we create an application consistent copy of that data set. We then kind of find the changed blocks and in an incremental forever fashion, not like a synthetic full backup where you have to run a new base backup every 2 weeks. It's truly incrementally forever. You run a base backup once and you can continue running incremental going forward. Only the changed blocks get essentially moved to a scalable repository that we have. We call it the vSnap storage manager. And that repository is where all of your instant mapping data sets essentially end up in. We're actually looking to add tiering to multiple data sets. It's available for VMware today, but it's going to be expanded to a whole bunch of data sets soon. And that's a statement of direction for our Spectrum Protect Plus. And you could actually tier it to object storage or cloud environments or another disk pool that is low performance and so on through the platform itself. And that actually allows you to enable all these different use cases that we are looking at, whether it's test dev or DevOps or reporting, analytics, forensics, or just your day-to-day operations. I joke that snapshots are like gym memberships. Everybody's got access to them. Doesn't mean everybody uses them on a day-to-day basis. This is a platform that allows you to store your copies in the form of snapshots and actually encourages you to use them on a regular basis. You get to exercise your data set and you keep your business very relevant to the most recent versions of data sets that business is producing within your environment.
And I think, can you come back? And I think, Satya, I have also one question from the Johan. It's when will be the Spectrum Protect Plus version be available with the Spectrum Protect integration without the TDP4V needed? So could you clarify this question? I said that we already have the offload option today, but what about this demanding from the TDP4V? Could you clarify this question and answer?
Yeah, the answer is pretty soon. I hate to give timelines on a webinar, but it's pretty soon. In fact, there will be a beta expected very soon. Anybody that is interested in this, definitely reach out to us. We're signing up beta customers, and you can actually play with it and provide feedback on how it should do better and so on, and certainly looking forward to your feedback on that front. Okay, so the most important part is the sooner than later in this scenario. So you're already working on it. Yeah, pretty close to the finishing line as well, but we should have a beta announcement pretty soon. So if you're a customer interested in doing a beta, definitely reach out to us and we'll get you signed up to the list. Super. Also, could you a little bit move, if you will move to the next slide, I see that I would like to more understand, I think most of the audience, it's how to intelligence reuse this data. We spoke about it with Steve on the last webinar, that could you say your thoughts about it? Because I think this is quite a huge challenge today, yes? Everybody talks about it, but not every vendor has the ideal scenario how to reuse this data as a secondary storage like later on after you do in the backups. Yeah, so the idea is to have one set of copies that can be multi-purposed for any number of data sets, right? So historically, backups are where data has gone to die, right? People do a whole bunch of backups, but they certainly wish that I hope to God I never have to use it, right? It's your insurance policy, and you don't want to exercise your insurance policy too much. But as the businesses become more and more dependent on data, it's not just your insurance reasons why you need access to your data back. You may want to run a month-end report on your SQL datasets or your Oracle datasets. You may want to run your payroll based on a snapshot of a copy from the 31st of last month. Those are all scenarios where you need access to a specific dataset and a specific version of the dataset. And we see more and more customers starting to leverage the same copies that you're creating for backups as insurance policy, but also to drive real business outcomes. An example I'll give you is, one of the customers that use the CDM technology, where they rely on snapshots and so on, they're in a very seasonal business. This is a company that becomes like a low point of their season. They only have a few thousand employees, but at high point of their business, they actually have over 30,000 employees. So to go from a handful of 1,000 employees and grow 6 times and 7 times within a year, every year, up and down, it means that no data is too new to them. 2 days old is too old for this customer. And they want to be able to take a fresh copy on a regular basis and leverage that to make decisions as they make things like, where do I send my pizza? Where do I send a specific set of inventory? These are all questions that they have to answer because the business is very seasonal and you need fresh access to data to make real business outcomes. Okay, and that's really what the slide is actually trying to copy. We're not just going to be optimizing for creation of copies, but also going to be optimizing for use of copies, which means that you have to know how to track a copy from being just a temporary copy you provisioned for testing purposes. And before you know it, people are already starting to use it in production. So you want to transition them over to a production copy. How do you do database refreshes and resets? Those are all things that you can actually drive. And everybody knows people come to you when you need something, but very few people come to you when they no longer need that thing. So having a platform to see what clones are provisioned and be able to get those clones deleted in a timely fashion with control available to you is a big benefit of a platform that unifies all of the CDM and data protection use cases into one intuitive interface. Okay, I did promise that I won't be talking too much about the product, and I actually want to get to the best practices around protecting databases. Some of it applies to our product, and I'll actually point that out as we go through it. But I think let's focus on the best practices for selecting a specific backup method. When do you select what, and how does it impact things that you may not have immediately thought of? So those are all things that I think I want to walk through in the webinar. But before I go there, I'm going to say I normally don't accept webinars for an hour long without somebody being able to give relief to my accent. I'll say a picture is worth 1,000 words. With my accent, it's worth a whole lot more. So there is nobody to give you accent relief. In fact, with Pavel and me, we're going to double down on our accents. So what I've decided is I'm just going to go through these best practices through memes. I will add a disclaimer. These are not slides created by any organizations I represent. These are all my own. But it should be kind of fun to walk through a set of best practices that I think we should talk about with real life analogies built in. As I said, a picture is worth 1,000 words. With my accent, it's worth a whole lot more. And that's the reason for using these memes to explain each of these recommendations.
So for all of the audience, we are glad because we were just watching the memes. We don't need to talk about it. So this will be the first presentation.
Well, you tell me that after we end this.
Okay.
So let's go through this.
Go on.
The first best practice I think everybody thinks of, and it's almost a requirement rather than a best practice, is you certainly want your backups and restores to be fast. You don't want, nobody wants fewer versions of a copies that is taking fewer amount of disk space. Everybody wants more with less. That's really what the first consideration set I want to talk about, right? You want your backups to be fast and you to be a lot less furious with your backup selection. So what are some of those main considerations? You certainly want to have more snaps and laps every day. What does that mean? You have to back up some of your data sets every hour, maybe even do a log truncation and log backup every 15 minutes. And that requirement must be something that your data protection solution should be able to accomplish. So different data sets certainly have different requirements, but just knowing how many snaps you want to take and how many laps in between in terms of log backups that you want to do in between is certainly a huge consideration to making a decision on what type of backup that I want to perform. You should also plan for change rates. And what this means is typically a lot of customers will say, hey, I have a daily change rate of 5%, but I want to take snapshots every 2 hours in my infrastructure. That's technically 12 snapshots created a day. So if you sized an environment for a 5% change rate, but you were actually capturing it through 12 snapshots, you would expect that the change rates from the system is actually higher, only because the same changes get captured multiple times. It's the same blocks that keep changing in a lot of database environments. And that means it does have an impact on change rate. So knowing how often you want to do the backups and what selection you make and how many of them you retain has an impact on change rate. The third thing, and something not a lot of customers actually immediately think of, this is not part of a selection process typically, but after they go production, they see that, hey, this is something I should have considered. Production DBs, when you're taking so many different snapshots a day, whether you're moving it to a secondary storage appliance or you're keeping it in your storage, you need to come up with a solution that has the least impact on your production databases. So in the order of impact, obviously an in-place snapshot that was hardware assisted tends to be the least impact. The next least impact is going to be a solution that uses change block tracking and simply moves changed blocks. But any solution that does regular base backup of your production databases, that's an extraordinary amount of impact that you do add to the system. And in fact, just doing those regular base backups will actually require you to size these application services to be a monster when you don't really need them to be if you are being efficient about your backup process. We'll talk about granularity of selection in a separate slide as well, but you also need to know whether you're backing up a very important database in your instance or you're backing up everything in your instance. And I think that also plays a role in what type of backup selection that you use. And we'll talk about some of the other things as well as we go through each of these. But your big selection process should be, how do I get as many backups as I want, but still have a platform that allows you to manage everything without a lot of heartache and headache. Again, something that Protect Plus strives to do and delivers, but that should be one of the key selection criteria for you as you select a backup application for your data sets. The next thing I wanted to talk about is we talked about in-place options versus an appliance options versus a traditional regular base backups option. And one of the key things people ignore is the traffic considerations with that kind of data set. What does it mean? You certainly have to account for data movement from point A to point B. A lot of the times a backup is sitting on a completely different rate stack, either software defined or a hardware appliance. And there are benefits to either of these models, but the data needs to move from point A to point B. So how much data do you move from point A to point B is an important consideration. I live in the New York metro area, and I have to go through the tunnel very often. And anybody that is regular in New York area knows that you don't enter a tunnel without a day of food and supply in your car, because you could be stuck there for a long time. And if you're not careful about designing your backup solution, you're creating a lot of network traffic in your infrastructure and a lot of IO traffic on your storage, and coming up with the best solution that minimizes that traffic is what is going to give you the best experience with this infrastructure. So don't pick a solution thinking the traffic isn't going to be bad. You have to plan for it and account for it when you choose that solution.
When I watch on TV, the US people in the traffic looks differently. Thank you for it. You said that this is a New York area, so we need to be careful when we're planning the journey.
Yeah, well, a lot of the times you can walk faster than you can get there in a car. So, it's a special in our metro area. So, the third thing I actually wanted to talk to you about is certainly agents. I mean, agents have a bad rep, and for good reasons, right? So it requires a lot of maintenance. It requires you patch, you clone, every time you have a new database, you deploy a new agent, and you have to keep track of it, you have to update it, you have to reboot on some cases when they use filter drivers and so on. You have to enable auto-discovering new data sets, and it's just not very cumbersome. I mean, it's just not very easy to maintain an infrastructure full of agents. And I mean, this is what we've handled by leveraging Patch Tuesdays. But I mean, you shouldn't have to sacrifice a day in your work life to just maintaining these agents. And a good solution should be able to add that infrastructure piece or the application awareness piece without having to make that agent visible to you. They should simply be able to blend in. They should be able to run without you actually even noticing it. So that's really a key element or a best practice to use when you're selecting a backup application. Who wants to maintain another agent in your infrastructure when you could simply inject an agent on demand whenever you're doing a database operation, whether it's a backup, whether it's a restore? There's no reason to have a persistent agent. There are two other reasons why I would point out this is very important. One is security, right? If you have an agent sitting there 24/7 listening on a port, that's actually an attack surface area that is pretty big, and direct entry into your SQL or Oracle service because there's an agent sitting there 24/7 waiting for somebody to send this. And there are certainly ways to mitigate the risks with it, but the risks do exist that you have to open a firewall port and have an agent sitting there listening to it and waiting to be manipulated in some shape or form. The second thing is actually nothing to do with security or ease of use. In fact, as creators of backup products in the past, we know about 70% of code that gets written in backup products is to just let the clients and the agents and the master servers or the server units, the client-server communication comprises about 70% of code you end up writing to support an application. If you can reduce that client-server communication work, you can actually innovate faster. You can add support for more applications sooner, and be able to leverage a fairly easy to use system very quickly. So a solution that doesn't use a lot of agents is actually very useful because they can add support for newer platforms faster than somebody that needs to maintain agents going forward as well. And again, this is where we are taking the Plus product line with us as well. We, by principle, do not use any agents that a user has to manage and maintain. They're all microservices we deploy on demand to do the work it needs to do without having you to patch and update and reboot these agents on a regular basis. Okay, so the next one I want to talk about is really what's your cost of downtime. And the reason I bring this up is because the data has very asymmetrical value when it's down. You actually value your data a whole lot higher when you don't have it in front of you. It's almost like your a partner or a significant other or your wife, right? You don't know their value until they are no longer there and you miss them, right? So it's not a whole lot different. Their value increases exponentially the longer you don't have access to your data set. So a lot of people make decisions based on just how quickly a backup runs or how painless the backup process is, but an equal amount of thought must be put into how soon do you want your data set. There's no one size that fits everybody, but knowing how soon you want your data set back is very, very important. And also the experience that you want to have when your data is down and kind of being prepared for it is just as important. So what do I mean by that? So the point I was trying to show here on the car is if you lost a tire on a running vehicle, which is exactly the same as losing a very important database in your environment, what should the experience be for you? Is it the case of a Formula One pit stop where in 8 seconds you've got a new set of wheels and you're on your racetrack again? That's certainly possible, but usually possible with hardware snapshots where you could flip to a hardware snapshot. It's not only possible to get on the road real quick, but you're going to be running at full speed, just as you were before you had the outage. The second option, and a lot of people resort to, because this could be something that you can live with for some data sets, is just having a spare tire in the car and waiting for it to be replaced, right? So this is typically done through backup appliances, whether it's software-defined or hardware appliances. This is your spare tire option. Your database is down. You want to quickly run it from some secondary storage that you have provisioned, whether it's just JBods and a vSnap repository that is running on top and being a very cost-efficient solution. What it makes is it makes the data set immediately available to you. Whether it is the same performance you get out of running it from your flash systems, probably not, but it is possible before it is performant. But you do have access to the data set. It gets you back on the road. You're operational, but at some point you have to schedule a migration back to production and production infrastructure. But it allows you to quickly get up and running.
One thing, for sure it's a Volkswagen, but I see on the behind you have a truck. So this photo should be doing again in US. I'm a little bit worried about what's going on there.
Well, we have participants from both US and Europe here, and I know you drive a wagon. So I chose this specifically for you, Pavel. So,
Roland, we don't see these problems, yes, in Europe when we're talking about the Volkswagen. So no.
No, they always run. So.
Well, I really like this photo. I don't see any unusual in this photo, but okay.
Sounds good. And yeah, it fits in a parking space though in Europe, which is which I struggle with every time I get there. The third piece is obviously, I mean, in US there is this concept of calling AAA every time you have a flat tire. It's essentially somebody who will bring something to you and will fix it for you. You're just going to sit there on the road for 2 hours and 3 hours. I don't know what the equal service in Europe is, but you basically call for help and wait there and wait for somebody to do it. It's primarily targeted at people like me who don't know how to fix a tire, but it's certainly an available option. And this is often what people do when they use tips. You go ask for tips, bring those tips back, and you do the restores. Look, there is a data set that probably deserves one of these three. And the importance of the database and your requirements will drive which one you want within your infrastructure. The goal is to actually give you the capability to do all three in one platform. And that's really where Spectrum Protect Plus is leading to as well. We want to be able to give you the Formula One pit stop experience. In 8 seconds, you're up and running, and you're up and running at full speed and actually trying to regain your position on the racetrack. Or we can give you a perfectly functional spare tire. Yeah, you're not going to be able to drive above 60 miles an hour, but it's there, and you're on the road, and you can change it over the weekend, and a crisis is averted. Or you've got plenty of time, you're just going to sit and wait for a mechanic to come and fix the problem for you, and you could certainly do that as well. But knowing what you need for which databases and when is probably the most important when it comes to coming up with your backup policies and restore policies. Okay, so and another thing that I wanted to point out, the memes start getting worse and worse. I have to apologize. Is a key thing in databases, database layouts. How is your database laid out in storage? Do they all live with family or roommates? As in, do you have a whole bunch of databases sitting together on a single LUN? And there are customers that have very valid use cases for it, especially if you have systems that are not capable of global deduplication. They're really only capable of deduplicating data set within a volume. I think NetApp is one of them, if I remember right. So you've got these vendors that have deduplication limitations on just be able to work with just a very small specific subset of data sets. So I want to load as much of my databases into a single location because I want to get great deduplication. That's perfectly fine, except that it's going to create you a list of things to worry about. Yes, you will get great deduplication, but do you create a whole bunch of other problems that you have to address? Some of these examples, one, if you use hardware-assisted snapshots, it essentially means even if you want to protect one of those databases, you're maintaining a snapshot of that whole volume in the back end. So you may have 100 databases, but you're only interested in protecting one, but you're taking a snapshot of the whole 100 databases in the back end. So if you have a lot of commonality, and if you're expecting your backup and restore needs to happen at the same time, there's certainly a good case for putting them all together in one LUN. But in many cases, assigning different LUNs for your data volumes, log volumes for different databases tends to give you the most flexible options within your infrastructure. Otherwise, you have to worry about what granularity of backups do you allow. For example, purpose-built backup appliances or software-defined appliances will allow you to pick and choose backing up a specific database, irrespective of what your layout is. And if you coexist a whole bunch of databases together, that is likely a better solution for you than otherwise. But even then, you have to consider things like how concurrent can I run? Can I run 8 concurrent threads or RMAN channels in my infrastructure, or is that going to create a disk thrashing in the backend because everybody is going after the same run? All you're going to do is lose a lot of time in context switching between those threads instead of moving this. So yes, putting them together in one volume to get deduplication may be a good thing, but I highly doubt that's going to become the most efficient thing going forward. So having a clear and a compartmentalized layout is going to be very important for your backups and restores going forward. Okay, this is another one of my favorite topic. Just don't do this. Just don't be a dumpster. A lot of guys that I know create backup dumps because, well, that's what I've done for the last 12 years. I'm going to create backup dumps and in a 100 gigabyte database, I'm just going to create a 100 gigabyte dump every single day. The impact that you produce by making a decision like this is very, very high. One, you have to size your SQL and Oracle service to be almost twice as much as you would need otherwise. And a lot of applications are moving towards, charging you based on vCPUs and memory and so on. So there is licensing models that are actually coming up based on the resources you allocate to your service and not just capacity. So in those cases, you're essentially costing your company a lot of money by trying to remain on very old style backup dumps that you do on a daily basis. Log management, on the other hand, if done correctly, can be very useful to you. Logs certainly give you a way to achieve a level of frequency that would be very difficult to achieve, especially if you use any data movement logic. But you do have to make sure that log management is either done independently by the admins or is delegated to the backup application. But you don't want them doing at the same time because it only creates a set of logs that neither of you can use. Anybody that doesn't just do logs, but also decides to go ahead and dump data sets, just know that the amount of change rate impact that you're adding to your company's backup infrastructure is totally not worth the benefit that you're trying to bring. So yes, it's better to be safe, but you're making a lot of sorry faces in your backup team when you decide to go rogue and create a whole bunch of dumps. And also when you go rogue and create a whole bunch of truncate logs outside of the product, because it actually renders the backup application logs pretty much useless at that point. So don't interfere. Either take it on or delegate it to your backup application. Don't try to do both at the same time because nothing can come out of it.
Satya, you a little bit lied to us because you said the photos will be worse and worse, and this is really good one. I cannot say it about the previous one, but this one is really good. And I love this, don't be a dumpster. I see the hashtag on LinkedIn on it. So I will definitely use it in one of my posts. No worries, you will be also there. But and also it should be the question, give me your one of the dumps from, or where is my dump is above, is below one of the trees. So just find it out. But what I also noticed is that, people love to be at dumpsters because they think that there will be a cheaper option. This is what I also noticed. Yeah, we're doing a dumps because we need agents and we store everything on one NFS and then we use one agent to store it. and they don't care about the process and the data workflow is quite, you know, you have a few steps to achieve the backup, and what about the restore? And I'm really glad that you said about it. I'm really glad that you said about the log management, because we need to emphasize that this is a huge problem still, even if you have 2018.
Yeah, and I think these are very well-meaning DBAs often making those calls. I would point out to them, yes, you are very well-meaning. You're just trying to save your behind, but the problems you create in the back end without any due upfront notice or knowledge to your backup infrastructure is there's more trouble than you get by trying to be extra cautious and extra safe, because that's certainly possible with your backup application itself. Just go create a milestone backup and run your policy once more before you go to make any changes. There's really no reason for you to dump a full database dump onto a SIF share or a volume within that server every time you need to do something to cover your behind. Again, reasons are well intended, but it does cause problems down the stack for everybody else. So please do keep that in mind as you go through it. As a support engineer in the past, I have been hurt by people doing this way too often to not feel strongly about it. Okay, so I promise I will wrap this up fairly quickly. A lot of you have been very generous with your time already. So I'll go through the next few slides fairly quickly. I've only probably got another 3 or 4 at most. This is a very favorite meme of mine as well. A lot of the times what you expect and what you see in the ad is what you see on the left, but what you get when you go order something is what you see on the right. I'm not a big burger person, but I've seen enough burgers to know that what you see and what you get is very, very different. This is not a lot different for test dev environments as well. People ask you to do a lot of pre-production testing. They will ask you to verify that before you go production, that the code changes you've made has not created a significant impact. But how do you prove that if you're not going to be able to run this on the same stack as your hardware stack you use for production? If you use an FS9100 today or a V9000 today, you want to be able to run that test on that V9000, not on some purpose-built backup appliance, because the changes in performance is not something that you can measure because you don't know what changed that performance. You're not going to get the same performance anyway. So whether you want to retain performance sensitivity on your test dev applications has a huge impact on what method you provision to use for your backups. An in-place CDM, if it's performance sensitive, tends to be the most preferred choice. If it's just a matter of bringing something up real quick, yeah, sure, go ahead and use a backup appliance, and that can get you the same benefit. But if you're performance sensitive, you certainly should be looking at a hardware-assisted snapshot mechanism as well. And the last thing, and something that's fairly overlooked, is the ability to provide self-service and automation for everything. You want to have products that are built with REST APIs from day one. And why is it important to have REST APIs from day one? There are a lot of products that will provide you with REST APIs that are retrofitted into a legacy set of APIs. And those are good, but it's not going to give you the same level of flexibility and control compared to a product that is built with REST APIs from day one. And that is very important when you work with Ansible or Jenkins or Puppet. You have to be able to create plugins that work with this CI/CD pipeline tools like Jenkins and Puppet, where you want to be able to provision a database copy fairly quickly with just a click or not even have a click, you just have something run in the background that do it for you. Product reusing your backup infrastructure to do that, the big reason for that is often that if you do just a Puppet orchestration, you're going to be working on static images, which means that you're working on a database image that was from 6 months ago. Whereas if you used your backup application and integrated with your Jenkins and CI/CD pipeline, you would actually be provisioning the latest copy of your most important SQL or Oracle databases and bring it up on a daily basis for testing. And that actually reduces the risk of your applications going wrong in real life production. So being able to work with a backup solution that is built with REST APIs from day one is just as important as anything else we've discussed so far, because again, there are not a lot of people running these systems going forward. It's really systems running these systems, and having a robust set of APIs that have control as well as flexibility is extremely important in selecting and running your backup infrastructure. This is my last slide in terms of best practices. And this is a shout out to all DBAs out there in the webinar. One of the things that there are a whole bunch of backup products in the industry don't do very well is actually honor your preferences. Databases allows you to set a lot of preferences within the database environments itself. What are some examples? In always on availability groups in SQL, you can designate a preferred node for backups where the backup should be running from that node, not from my primary node. You have RMAN catalog. Even if you take a snapshot outside of the RMAN infrastructure, RMAN still gives you an option to go back and record a copy within RMAN catalog. Oracle 12c, for example, recommended that you don't have to use hot backup mode going forward because we've optimized the product such that you can go take a snapshot directly without putting a database in hot backup mode and creating a spike in CPU usage or memory usage at that point. Again, a good solution should know to not put a database in a hot backup mode if you're going to take a snapshot of an Oracle 12c instance, right? So those are all things that a database solution should honor. So if there are preferences that you set up in your applications and honor, certainly ensure that those are honored. DBAs have a rep for being control freaks. That's because the backup solutions don't often honor their preferences. That's why they end up taking all the control back. But a good solution is something that honors all of these preferences and builds a provider that is specific and tailor-made for the application and not a generic baseline driver that every application needs to resort to. We have to play to those databases rules, and databases shouldn't have to play according to backup systems rules. And that's very important when it comes to leveraging a backup solution that you want to go ahead and use. So with that said, that's kind of a wrap of everything that I wanted to walk you through in terms of best practices. I will say a couple of things and wrap this up. One, our vision is to provide an answer for all workloads. We want to give you the ability to drive hardware snapshots and replication through the same platform. We want to be able to deliver a software-defined backup appliance where you could throw a bunch of JBODs and just build a software stack on top of it and give you a very cost-effective backup appliance for medium performance workloads. We also want to give you the ability to move datasets to tape and object storage and generally a lower performance, lower cost storage capabilities that are out there. And all of these have different profiles for ransomware alerts and so on. So we want to be able to build an air gap across multiple performance. We want to be able to give you an answer for all different types of performance workloads that you have. And a good platform will give you the flexibility across all of these spectrum of performance workloads. And the last thing, I'll wrap this up with perhaps the smartest man that's ever walked on planet Earth, you can either solve a problem or you can avoid a problem. Hopefully, a lot of the things that we talked about today will help you avoid a problem rather than having to solve it. We know you're all capable of solving it. Even wiser person would know how to avoid it. And hopefully that's something that we were able to capture in the webinar today, and look forward to your feedback as well.
Thank you, Satya, for all of these memes, for all of the pictures. It will remind us when we will speak with the DBAs next time, or we will do the consultancy from the data protection point of view. I think we have right now a good time, so I will close the recording. So thank you for this part, and we'll go into the QAs right now.